Right. Uh, and we've got the recording. Very good. Okay. Well, I'm pleased to be with you all tonight, even though there's a little bit of distance between us. Uh, the Railway Mail Service Library focuses upon the history of how mail was sorted in railway post offices between 1864 and 1977. I thought the best way to illustrate that is to prepare a presentation that has these points. Wait a second. Come on, let's get there. So we're going to talk about what the railway mail service was so that everybody is aware of that portion of the post office department, and then what the functions were of a railway post office. As Eric mentioned, there's a PDF file that has more information in it for those who want to delve into additional background. Also, that PDF file are notes pages for the presentation. So you will see the slides that I'm going to show tonight, plus notes underneath of it, which sometimes includes additional photographs that cover additional topics. And then we'll wind up with a postal history example. The running time's roughly about a half hour or so. We could take it as long as you want with questions and answers. So we'll get underway with the first section, overview of the railway mail service. Now, this badge is what railway postal clerks wore beginning in 1899. And they pretty much wore these all the way to the end until being replaced by photo identification. And that was in the 1960s. But when the post office department issued that the photo identification, many of the clerks continued to wear their badges. It was a source of pride, and it was the closest thing that you have to the logo or the emblem of the railway mail service. And so our next slide is the first route. And just so that you know, I'm not going to really read everything on this slide. I'm going to talk to the slides. The notes pages do contain more content. There was a route. You'll find people talking about, oh, well, was the first railway post office in 1862 or was it in 1864? There was a route in 1862 between Hannibal and St. Joseph, Missouri on the Hannibal and St. Joseph Railroad, which is later became part of the Burlington route. And that first route was different than the later railway post offices. First of all, it only sorted mail going westbound so that it could make connections with an overland stage at St. Joseph, Missouri. It just had one clerk. There was no mail being sorted eastbound, although mail may have been carried. And in addition, it was only lasted about 8 months. So if it was something that continued past 1862, then you might be able to say that that's really the beginning. But the first permanent route that was established on August 28th, 1864, ran between Chicago, Illinois, and Clinton, Iowa on the Chicago and Northwestern Railroad. And that railroad really was also the beginning of the railway mail services as well as the railway post offices. There was a fellow named George Armstrong who suggested that mail could be sorted on trains while it was moving, and that would advance the mail. And although that was the first time it was done in the United States, mail was being sorted in England after 1838 and in Canada by 1862. So chances are Mr. Armstrong was aware of some of these other worldwide changes and used that as a partial basis for his recommendation to the Post Office Department of trying this permanent route. The last run on June 30th, 1977 was between New York and Washington, D.C. Just a little tidbit there is that was not Amtrak, even though Amtrak started up on 1971. Penn Central continued to operate that route. And then later on, Conrail operated that route until 1977. So if you ever think about having a model railroad and having an Amtrak or railway post office on there, that's not correct, a correct prototype. Um, and the cars were never repainted for Conrail. They just were painted for Penn Central. I don't think they ever bothered repainting them. Some of them may have even still said Pennsylvania on them. So the Railway Mail Service, which was an organization within the Post Office Department and managed railway post offices, was renamed the Postal Transportation Service in 1949. Then there was another organization in 1960. Part of the reason why you had these transitions is by 1949, it was recognition that there were other modes of transportation being used for transporting mail. It wasn't all rail anymore. You had highway post office routes being established in 1941. For a portion of time, the air mail service was part of the railway mail service until a separate organization was set up for that. So it was just a reflection of changing times. Now, for convenience, whenever I talk about RMS, I'm talking about RMS for the entire history. It's shorthand rather than going around saying Railway Mail Service, Postal Transportation Service, Postal Transportation Service, and then Bureau of Transportation. Um, if you see me referring to Railway Mail Service, just understand that you had these other transitions in place. And then during the 20th century, as many railroad fans know, railroads typically were divided up in divisions. It was no different than for the railway mail service. By the end of the railway mail service, there were 15 divisions, and later they were carved up into regions. But the divisions help you know what routes and therefore what schedules to look in if you're trying to find some information. The interesting thing is the schedules of mail routes were issued for each division several times a year. In later years, it was changed maybe about twice a year, usually. And they all started with issue number one in 1877. They maintained that. And that badge that I showed you earlier on, there actually was a badge number one. It was issued in the for the and assigned to the Boston region. So somebody up there in the New England states carried badge number one. Unfortunately, I don't know where it exists, but I have seen badge number 8. And they were sequentially numbered all the way through to the end. So the highest number is around 96,000. So you can, there were more than 96,000 railway postal clerks during the entire history of the railway mail service, because some of the badges, when they were brought back and turned in by a clerk retiring or leaving the service, they would be reissued. So they didn't always, that serial number on the badge doesn't really represent the total number of clerks that ever worked in the railway mail service. So this is an illustration from a 1944 Saturday Evening Post, back when the Post was the magazine of the day, and it came out once a week. And I have a cursor moving around there. Now, it may be very, very small, but whether the railway post office car was a full-length railway post office car, or it was just a partial length, like 15-foot apartment or a 30-foot apartment, it all had the same basic features, same basic functions. It's just how many clerks were in there and how much space was allocated for mail distribution. So where I'm going to move the cursor is in the upper right-hand corner. If you can see it, says washroom and lockers. That area was where they had bags of working mail that was going to be sorted en route. So it would be, they bring it on in, and then the next stop was opening the pouch or the sack. If there was pouches of letter mail, There was always a clerk called the pouch man in the crews, and that person would take out letter packages. He knew what these assignment clerks were doing. So if he saw one for New York City or one for Portland, Maine, he would throw it to the appropriate clerk that was working that section of mail. Just so that you know, there were about 1,080 letter slots here. And as the letter slots became full, the clerks would tie out a package or a bundle of letters. It would be called a letter package, put a facing slip on it, and then it was ready for dispatch. So then you come down to this next section here where there's the first few are pouches for outgoing mail. Then the rest of them are sacks where they're throwing newspapers, large flats, other kinds of second or third or fourth class mail. And they had overhead boxes. They had the racks here. So they really maximized the space in a railway post office car. Down here, they show a person with the picker-upper. Well, that's what you may call it if you don't know anything about railway post offices, but that's a mail crane. And then right here is the catcher arm. And the clerk would make nonstop dispatches as a train was passing by a station. And where they would throw out a pouch and they would pick up one. And so that was allowed them to provide service to the smaller towns along the way. I should have also mentioned that up here, right here where the cursor is, there's a little letter slot on the side of the car where it goes inside. It goes a chute down underneath the distribution case. And that was where if somebody during a station stop wanted to mail a letter, they could walk on over to the side of the car, lift up the letter slot, and put the letter in there. It would receive the postmark of that railway post office. Most mail, I'd say 99.9% of the mail that you see being sorted in this car does not receive a railway post office postmark. And I've written articles about mail that I can pretty much demonstrate moved in a railway post office, but does not have a railway post office postmark on the envelope. Then you get back down here, and this is mail that's been worked, mainly sacks of parcel post or bundled newspapers, whatever it may be, baby chicks, and they were all stacked in this area. When they got to a station where they would stop, they would load and unload mail from this area here. So this is in that PDF. You can take the time to look at it. The point about this article was this is, or this advertisement was, this is one of a series that the New York Central System had after they introduced the 1938 new 20th Century Limited. And the emphasis was that they had other ads showing the sleeping cars, the dining car, the observation car, and so on like that. It was a series of ads. The point about this particular ad was that no matter how affluent you were, what kind of first class privilege you had, you did not put step into this car. It was reserved solely for mail and for postal employees. Postal employees, railway postal clerks, were not employees of the railroad. They were not employees of Railway Express. So with that, we'll advance to the next slide. And a railway post office enabled en route distribution of several classes of mail. You had basically 4 classes. Parcel post was not really sorted in railway post offices unless it had special handling or special delivery. Third class, the circulars, the things that most people today would call junk mail, that was also not sorted for the most part in railway post offices. But first class letters, second class newspapers, and parcel post with special services attached, they were handled, as well as registered mail. Registered mail, which is a portion or part of first class, and you pay an additional amount, it was a care under one clerk, and that required special distribution knowledge. The other interesting thing is that in the earlier days of airmail, before you had some of the advanced air traffic control and air route control systems, a lot of times planes were delayed because of inclement weather. So there were many instances where airmail was actually diverted to railway post offices. And there's occasions that I've seen where there's a airmail stamp on the letter. And, I can show to you, or the markings on the envelope indicate that it never even saw the inside of a plane. Certainly by the 1960s, air transportation service was a lot more reliable, and by that time, the railway post offices were declining anyway. As I mentioned, the crews of railway mail clerks staffed RPOs. They were post office department employees. Keep that in mind. They were not express. They were not railroad employees. The average, if you had a 60-foot RPO car, like similar to that which appeared in the illustration in that ad, you had about 10 to 12 clerks in there, and they typically ran 300 miles. Now, for us railroaders, an engine crew would typically run about 100 miles. 100 mile was regarded to be a day. And so you'll find where most terminals were spaced on a railroad about 100 miles apart. Then the train crew might have gone a little bit further, but they certainly did not go 300 miles. So you had railway postal clerks that were in the car. They would get to the car maybe 2 or 3 hours ahead of time and start working mail as well as setting up the car. Then they would travel 300 miles standing up, except for if they had a little bit of time, they'd work a lunch break in there or something and have a sandwich and maybe sit down briefly. But it was all standing. And so as I use the example for the Washington and Cincinnati RPO, which was on the Chesapeake in Ohio, it went between Washington and Hinton, West Virginia, and the West Division was between Hinton and Cincinnati. So these were long distances. And then, as I mentioned, the crews had additional 2 to 4 hours of advance time before departure from the initial terminal. And sometimes they would work up enough mail where they'd actually put off mail from the RPO for dispatch even before the RPO left that initial station. So this is, we've skipped over 3 subtopics that explain some of the primary source documents that are used for railway post office research, as well as other information. That's all in the PDF file. I hope that you'll take time to peruse it. And if you have any questions about that content, just send me an email and I'll be glad to work with you on this. But I chose for this presentation a letter that went from Lewiston, Maine, and it was going to New Jersey. The nice thing about special delivery is that every time the letter was distributed, a postmark was applied to the back. So you can retrace the actual handling of a piece of mail. And the only difference between special delivery and regular first class mail, for the most part, was that the special delivery letter got those back stamps. A first class letter did not, but they're both handled the same way. So for any letter traveling basically from Maine down to New Jersey in 1935, this is about the way that it was handled, even if it was not special delivery and with a similar time frame. So now this is the back of the envelope. This tells the story about how this letter moved. And so what we're going to do in this part of the presentation, there's 5 postmarks on here, as well as the postmark that's on the front of the cover when it was initially posted. I'm going to show each postmark and show what train number and schedule that letter took. Now, there are some gaps in here because if a letter was in a tied out letter package and was dispatched from one railway post office to another by way of an intermediate railway post office, that intermediate post office didn't postmark it because they weren't sorting that letter. So you will find that in some cases I'm going to indicate that there's, I won't call that a phantom marking, but I will say that there's even more handlings. I think it was a total of about 7 different railway post offices that handled this letter, and did so in a very short period of time. So here we go. These are the things that the Railway Mail Service Library has that can be used for researching mail. If you have an envelope that has Railway Post Office or even the town postmark and a receiving postmark at some other town, I could probably help you out in figuring out how that letter traveled. So that's an invitation. My email address is at the end. It's in the PDF file. Uh, I enjoy that kind of research, and especially if you have a letter like the one just shown that has several postmarks on it, it becomes very, very interesting to reconstruct the movement of a letter, even though that's 90 years ago. Now, I'll tell you what, I cannot tell you how a letter moved yesterday or last week or last month, because all this schedule and scheme information, and a scheme is how mail is distributed, how mail reaches a final post office, or a post office is served by a particular mail route. That's all computerized now. It changes every day, and it's nobody's doing a data dump or printing it out. And so I feel sorry for the postal historians who may be interested in 2024, but there's nobody out there that'll really be able to help them. So the first postmark is Lewiston, Maine. And so that right-hand side shows a page for Androscoggin County. Lewiston had several railway post offices in closed pouch. CP means closed pouch, not Canadian Pacific. If it doesn't have the letters RPO after it, then it was a railway post office. So it had 4 railway post offices that they could have dispatched this letter to: Bangor and Boston, Farmington and Portland, Rumfield and Portland, Waterville and Lewiston. And then in addition, you had all these other routes here that Portland and Boston, Portland and New York, Port Rockland and Portland. There was a tremendous amount of service that supported Lewiston, Maine. So the reason why we've selected Rumfield and Portland here is because the next postmark on the back of the envelope says Rumfield and Portland, train 214. So you go to a schedule and you look up train 214. The B means that it's daily except Sunday. If there was an A in this table, and other tables do have an A later on, that just means daily. So you can see that train 214, when the letter was dispatched at Lewiston, the next stop was basically Portland, Maine at 11:15 and in the morning. And now railway mail service schedules don't have all the listing like you find in a public timetable or an employee timetable of all the intermediate stations. They only show the main junction points or major cities or so on that a route passed through. A lot of the clerks would carry a public timetable with them if they wanted to know, for example, if they were making intermediate nonstop exchanges at post offices and they wanted to know what time it was, they'd refer to the public timetable. So anyway, that letter got in at 11:15. Now, it shows that for train 214, it made a dispatch to the Portland and Boston train 156, daily except Sunday at Portland. You will not find a Portland and Boston postmark on this envelope because this Rumfield and Portland tied up a letter package, and it may have said Boston, Springfield, and New York. It may have said New Jersey letters. I'm not sure which that might have been, but in any event, that's the reason why there's no Portland and Boston RPO postmark on the letter. But train 156 left Portland, Maine at 10:29 and arrived in Boston at 1:10. So then it's going to make a dispatch to the Boston, Springfield, New York. And so that's where we're going next. There's let's see now. Okay. That was for train 29. Okay. It made a dispatch to train 29 on the Boston and Albany. And that left Boston at 4 o'clock and 6:45. No postmark for the Boston and Albany. Again, it was not sorted on the Boston and Albany RPO, but we know that it had to travel that way because when it got to Palmer, Massachusetts, then you do have Boston, Springfield, New York, where train 59 made a connection or left at 5:35 p.m. and then went to Grand Central Station at 8:55 p.m. So that's the third postmark on the back of the envelope, and it says train 59. You can see that in there. CU, I'm drawing a blank on what that is. I think that's daily except Sundays and holidays. I'm pretty sure that's what it is. So again, those little letters just are frequency notes about how often something the RPO operated. Your next postmark on there is the New York and Washington RPO. And you can't really make out the train number, but train 59 on the Boston, Springfield, New York made a dispatch to New York and Washington train 107. The schedule for train 107 is below. It left Pennsylvania Station at 1:35 in the morning and arrived at 3:30 in the morning into Philadelphia Broad Street Station. That was before 30th Street station was completely open. I believe so. Anyway, it was in the 1930s that they tore down Broad Street Station. And then it went to across the river to Camden, New Jersey at 5 a.m. Camden, New Jersey, there were frequent intervals that the dispatches were made between 5 a.m. and 10:30. So it left Broad Street Station, went across the Schuylkill River, and went into New Jersey. And that was a continuous office. And then Camden, New Jersey, sorted the mail for Collingswood, which is the address of this particular envelope, and it put it onto the Camden Terminal in Haddonfield closed pouch, which was just it was a bus route, a city bus route. So it went on down the road. This Camden Terminal in Haddonfield closed pouch. The arrow is pointing to Haddon Avenue. It left Camden, went down to where this marker is down here. That's the destination for the special delivery letter. And special delivery letter indicated that when it's received at the post office, it gets immediate delivery. It does not wait till the next morning when the next morning's letter carrier delivery is out. And that was important because in 1935, the letter got into Camden, New Jersey on a Sunday. So even though Sunday was not a day of which a letter carrier would have gone out, the special delivery got the letter delivered immediately to this address at 2 West Wayne Terrace, 3 days after mailing from Lewiston, Maine. So this is an illustration of how railway post offices work. It's one of several. I can provide other articles if you want to read them. I can provide a lot more information if you want. For those of you that are modelers, if you want to understand better what that railway post office car and your passenger train did, there's all sorts of resources available for that. But at this time, as far as I'm concerned, Eric, you can open the mics, and if people do have questions, I'll be glad to touch upon them. And like I say, I hope you enjoy the PDF file with all the supplemental information.
Well, Frank, first, thank you for presenting to us. And yeah, anybody have any questions, fire away.
Nobody at the firehouse has any questions.
You all are an easy crowd.
Well, I have a question. Where in the train was the RPO located?
Okay, typically it was behind the locomotive, but the actual post office department regulations stated because of the chance of wrecks or derailments or some other incident involving the locomotive, head-end collision are the most catastrophic collisions that you can have, especially with a steam locomotive. They post office department required that if there were unoccupied cars, either deadhead equipment or storage mail cars or express cars that were not occupied, to place those between the locomotive and the RPO car. So you might have some cars ahead of the RPO and then have the RPO there. And that also made it a little easier when they pulled into a station with a short platform, that you didn't have to stop the train twice, because the RPO would have been at one end of the platform. Your coaches and sleeping cars would have been maybe at the middle or the other end. If you had the RPO right next to the engine, you might have had to make two separate stops. Now, I do want to mention something about this, the nomenclature. Most modelers, a lot of rail fans, they look at a car that has two large wide doors in the car. They call that a baggage car. If you look at some old photographs and you see 5 or 10, what they're calling baggage cars, there was not that much baggage moving between one place and another. It was usually express, or it was storage mail. And very often it was storage mail. And in fact, many Railway Express Agency reefers in later years, when the Railway Express traffic started dropping off, Railway Express was trying to earn some money through the per diem. So they go ahead and let the post office department and the rail carriers load up Railway Express reefers or other Railway Express cars with storage mail as well, because that was all money that Railway Express would get for otherwise idle equipment. So the short answer is, many times it's at the end of the right next to the locomotive. Most of the time they were separated. Now, if you had a mixed train, that RPO might be at the very end of the train, and it was probably a combination car with a baggage and express section in addition, and a small coach section. So that might have been at the very end of the train, or it could have been in the middle of the train with some freight cars behind it. It was all over the place when it comes to a mixed train. So that's the way to do it. And your best reference for that kind of information is if a railroad had what's called a consist book. It listed the cars that are in a train, what their destinations are, what their purpose was, such as mail, express, passenger, sleeping car, diner, and all. It was really identifying what the consist of the train was. And whatever is in the consist book is showing the general layout of what the train was as it traveled. The only exception is the post office department, if there was a lot of mail moving between one place and another. If they needed more cars for storage mail, they'd load them up and maybe stick them in the consist too. But the consist book talked about the day-to-day requirements for a particular train, and usually mainline trains.
Thank you very much. That's a comprehensive presentation and answer to my question.
You're welcome, Kevin. And like I say, I hope you enjoy the PDF file when you get a chance to look at it. Any other questions? This is my email address. I'm easy to find. If you can't remember anything else, you look for Boyce Railway Depot. You probably won't get my last name, Scheer, but if you remember that much, you'll find me on Facebook. You'll find me in a Google search or a Yahoo search. So there's lots of different ways to find me. And of course, if this is posted onto your website, then you'll have this for reference. But, I'm here. The Railway Mail Service Library is here to support the postal historian and the railroad modeler, giving more information so that you appreciate what it is that's on your layout, or what it is as far as the railroad history pertaining to passenger train operations.
I had a question.
Go ahead.
Um, where do you find these consist books? And of course, my interest is Nevada railways. Did they exist for any of the early Nevada railways?
Yes, well, the schemes exist for Nevada. Schedules exist for Nevada. Nevada was in the 8th Division of the Railway Mail Service. Where do you find them? You find them at 117 East Main Street in Boyce, Virginia. Now, I fully expect that not very many people are going to drive to a town of about 600 people to look through a bunch of books. I've got a lot of material scanned. If it's a custom inquiry that requires, specific information from something that's not already scanned, it may take me a little bit longer to answer that. But if you're interested in Nevada, a specific railway post office route or everything in Nevada, this is the place where you can come. Now, another thing that you can do, though, online, if you do a search for Daily Postal Bulletin, the Daily Postal Bulletin was published in 1880. It's all been digitized. It's searchable. I had a couple days ago a fellow who's interested in Alaska routes. He's doing research on Alaska, and he went there and found about 600 different documents that he could review. There's
But I
ways
mean,
that you can there's ways that you can improve that search so that you're not just getting everything under the sun.
but my
For
question was directly, I mean, a lot of that I am finding, thank you. I do the postal bulletins,
okay, all right.
but it's the consist books,
Oh, the consist books.
consist book. Yeah.
Are you dealing with Southern Pacific or Southern?
Well, it's the NCO, the Southern Pacific,
Narrow
CPP,
gauge.
narrow gauge, Carson and Colorado, Tonopah and Goldfield. There's a number, the Palisades and Eureka.
Okay, well, Dale, you and I have had some conversations about that. As far as where you get any additional, I don't think that for smaller railroads, branch line railroads, short line railroads, they ever got so sophisticated to be with consist books. Mostly what you find for the consist books are your mainline passenger trains on major railroads. However, as you know, Dale, there's all sorts of paper that's out there. You might find the conductor's consist or a conductor's book that where the conductor on a daily basis was keeping track of the cars that were in their train. So if you just happen to look out for the NCO and find something like that, that's going to be your gold mine, a literal gold mine. But unfortunately, even though there's a lot of material, there's a lot of material in this building, this Railway Mail Service library. It's 117 feet long and 26 feet wide. There's a lot of material in there, but it probably has only 1% of all the information, maybe not even 1% of all the information that ever existed between 1864 and 1977 regarding mail by rail. So, but it's got enough to answer many questions. So I don't have any good suggestions for you on where you find consist books if you're getting into narrow gauge or short line equipment, other than it's serendipity. You may just find something out of the blue. Some historical societies have that, but I know that you've been very energetic in trying to mine any of the data that you can find, and you've done a lot of research. This is one of the nice things about postal history and railroad research is you can always expect to find something new every day if you're diligently looking. And
I gotta I got to get back over to the Laws Museum and try them again as I've learned more. Maybe I can do a better job searching there next time.
Well, yeah, you can. Now, the laws are not going to tell you anything about how.
Oh, I
the
meant,
cons-
I meant the Laws Station. It's a name of a station on the car
Oh,
snake.
laws, LAWS. Yes, that's right. And I
Yes.
think you mentioned that in some of your emails too. So, yeah. If you get back there, you can find some nuggets. It takes a lot of digging. I go to railroad shows. You see piles and piles of paper on dealer tables. I don't have time in a 2 or 3 hour show to look through every pile trying to find something, that one item that may be interesting. Although I will say that I went to the Amherst show up in Massachusetts and happened to come across a booklet about the fast mail on the Chicago and Northwestern. And I'd never, in 60 years of collecting, I'd never seen that booklet before. There's a lot of things that people put on eBay, they say it's rare. But then when you see it about 5 times a year or more often, how rare is that? When you see something that you've never seen before after 60 years, that starts getting to be pretty rare in my mind. So I've also, that's outside of the scope probably of anybody's interest on this presentation, but I have items like that probably are one of a kind, even though it seemed like about 5,000 of those booklets were printed. That may be the only one that exists now. And so one of the purposes of the Railway Mail Service Library is to try to preserve and a lot of times digitize information, because that makes it much more accessible and you can share it a lot easier. And I don't have to worry about, oh, somebody wants a schedule from 1919 for a particular division. I don't have to worry about sending them the original and then suddenly it never comes back to me.
Well, I do have to say, with all your wonderful help, each day I'm getting better and better at researching on this. So thank you ever so much, Frank.
You're very welcome, Dale. Now, Martin, you have your hand up.
Yes. How are you? And by the way, very enjoyable, Frank. I've been looking forward to this session. I am a New Englander, grew up in Massachusetts, lived in Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, Rhode Island, but I never ventured into Connecticut. But the Boston, Maine was, what I grew up with. And I was curious about the RDC2s and the RDC3s because they were not giant, long, 60, 80-foot cars. What was how did they work out, if you will, for the B&M and other railroads that employed them? I was just curious.
Well, first of all, for the railway post office apartment, there was the RDCs and the RDC4s, RDC3s and RDC4s that had those.
I'm sorry, I forgot that.
Yeah,
I forgot the RDC4.
because I've seen people referring to the RDC2, which had a coach section and then an express section, but it did not have an RPO apartment. So
You're correct. I'm
the
sorry.
RDC3 had 30-foot RPO. The RDC4 had a 15-foot RPO. It worked out okay. Not many railroads, and that's been one of the puzzles in my mind. And I don't think that railroads were able to achieve the true economies of the self-propelled equipment. Because first of all, I think only about 300 RDCs were ever built by Bud and deployed and sold. Maybe it was closer to 400, but it was a relatively small number. By the time they were coming out in the 50s, the branch line operations already had bus transportation, or people were getting automobiles. Automobiles are really the main competition. 95% of intercity travel, or maybe 93% of intercity travel, is by automobile. And then you got about 5% by plane, and then bus and rail are fighting for that other 2%. And that's on mainline routes. The branch line routes were long ago either abandoned after the Transportation Act of 1958 made it easier to abandon some of those branch lines, or at least abandon the branch line passenger services. So, if they come around, I mean, that was the whole point about the gas electrics, what they call doodle bugs back, maybe 20 or 30 years earlier. The advantage was you had a self-propelled unit. You didn't have the complete expense of a locomotive and several cars and so on, and a smaller crew. Presumably it was the engineer and a conductor and maybe a brakeman as well. Some railroads were still requiring, some states were still requiring a full crew, 5 people in a self-propelled car, and that was killing the economics for that. There may have been some other things about the RDCs in terms of maintenance that made them very expensive to operate, but I've always been curious. I mean, when you think about light rail these days, a lot of that's electrified, but essentially light rail, of course, it's only for passengers, doesn't have any express, doesn't have any mail. That's all sort of coming around again, but that only exists because of state support and state or city funding, not because of the money coming out of the fare box. So that's a very puzzling situation for me. I thought RDCs would do better. They certainly seem like an answer to the decline of passenger services on branch lines. But, at the same time, my thinking is perhaps they just came along a little bit too late.
Well, you're exactly right. And that's exactly what I think. Instead of EMC coming out with the doodle bugs, number 1151 on the B&M and all that stuff, if the RDC had come out just 2 or 3 years earlier, I think it might have made a difference in the continuation of services to low density lines throughout the country, not just New England. And I remember I used to go to North Conway when I was a kid to ski at the Eastern Slopes Inn, and they were still running the snow trains with RDCs from North Station up to North Conway, and I was enamored by trains from the day I was born. So what can I say? You can probably tell. But I just was curious how they handled and how they generated revenue at that time when everything was declining because of the growth of automobiles and the interstate highway system. So that's just, that was the reason for my question.
Yeah, and it's a good question. You'd have to go to specific railroad and maybe some of the internal documents for that railroad that were doing. I'll tell you, the railroads were doing cost analysis all over the place for all those to decide whether to abandon, whether or not a service is viable. And it seems like the B&M had done extensive cost analysis and revenue studies. So, I certainly defer to that. As far as the other, I think after the first few years, they also started encountering some significant maintenance costs that deteriorated the benefits of the self-propelled cars. But
correct, because they never spent the money to fix the infrastructure in the last 10 years or 20 years. So it was a preordained outcome.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, near enough. To anybody that's really interested in the passenger service, I recommend an article that was published by David P. Morgan in 1959 in Trains Magazine. It's called "Who Shot the Passenger Train?" And it's really a nice in-depth article. It's probably like 20 or 25 pages long, which is very unusual for that magazine for one topic to take up substantially most of the issue. It provides a lot of insight. It's not railroad specific, although it gives railroad company examples But, you know, it doesn't go through and say for this railroad or that railroad, a particular set of considerations and revenue analysis. But it certainly gives you the bigger picture. And the thing was, with passenger service, there really was no one thing that shot the passenger train. It was a combination of activities and changing times, all sort of converging. And as a result, now you have Amtrak now. Amtrak doesn't cover its operating expenses out of the fare box. It depends upon government support and state and local support. None of the authorities like MBTA or New Jersey Transit operate out of the fare box. It's all subsidized. Subsidy isn't necessarily a bad thing because roads are subsidized, but you know, I fenced in my area of interest into something called a comfort zone, and that is between 1864 and 1977. So even though I'm interested in some of those, I don't have to answer those questions. That's the easy way out for me. But all worthwhile questions. I'll leave that to you and to other researchers to really delve into it. There's a lot more that could be written on those subjects if one really wanted to get into it. Maybe even the Bud Company, you know, I don't know what happened to the Bud Company records, but I'm sure they were monitoring, you know, the kinds of repairs. And there was a lot of deferred maintenance in that era. That's what caught everything up into such a downward spiral in the late 1960s. You had years of deferred maintenance that the railroads were never going to catch up. And as a result, they looked at abandonment or trimming back, but they never looked at really trying to get the facilities back up to even what their standards were back in the 1920s or before. Anybody else have a question?
Yes, I have a question. I have a question on the in a 30 RPO with a 30-foot compartment. How many employees would usually be in one of those? And the same question with a 15-foot compartment.
Right. Okay. So a 30-foot had about 5, maybe 6. And then the usually the 15-foot apartment had 1. Now, sometimes if it was leaving out of a major terminal and for the first part of the trip there was a lot of mail to work, there might be an additional clerk that would supplement that crew for part of the trip, get off at an intermediate point, and then turn around and come back on a train coming back into that initial terminal. So now I'm making this up. I don't know that this is a fact, but let's say, you know, you're coming out of Portland, going towards Boston, you get down towards Portsmouth, New Hampshire. You know, you might have had an example, a helper clerk that got on at Boston, out at Portland, went down to Portsmouth to help get the mail up and everything like that. Then get off at Portsmouth, wait for the train going back northbound back into Portland, you know, or vice versa, coming out of Boston, going north, you know. Once you got out of the main terminal and you started getting into smaller towns, there was less mail to be worked. It's that initial surge coming out of a main terminal. So excluding your helper runs, it was basically 4 to 5 clerks in a 30-foot car, and about certainly no more than 2, and usually just 1 clerk in a 15-foot apartment. But keep in mind, whether it's a 15, 30-foot or 60-foot RPO, they all had the same fixtures. It's just they were scaled down. They had a proportional number of fixtures. The larger you got, the more fixtures you had, you know, but they all had overhead boxes. They all had racks for sacks and pouches. They all had distributing tables. They all had letter cases. They all had bins for putting the mail that's bagged up. So if one gets into trying to model the interior of a railway post office car, that illustration that I had earlier is probably about the best way you can go. It doesn't show a 15 or a 30-foot apartment, there are standard plans that I can provide that show the floor layout for those smaller apartments.
I see. Thank you. So in a 60-foot car, which had 10 or 11 employees, would they all carry revolvers?
Yes.
They would. Okay.
Yeah. Well, you can't really see in this picture, but right here, that clerk there has got a revolver on the belt. The register. What the deal was that up until about 1965, and that's an approximate year, you got to worry about a 73-year-old guy remembering exact details without opening the book or opening reference material and looking at it. But in general, the clerks were all armed up until about the mid 60s.
I
And
see.
then what they did after that period of time, the person who was working in the doorway, the register clerk, and this person here is probably the clerk in charge. That person there, those were the 3 crew members that would have revolvers issued to them. Now, hold on a second. I'm going to stop sharing. I hope by now you've seen what my contact information is. Coincidentally, I went to Gun Broker here recently and bought this.
Okay.
Now, this is a Colt Banker Special. It's 38 caliber. And on the bottom, you can't really see it, but on the bottom, it has a number here. That's the number that in the accounting records or the accountable property records for a clerk, they were showing that they were issued a Colt 38 caliber pistol. And this number here identified the pistol, not the serial number that when you open up the barrel and drop it down, the serial number's on the frame. So now ordinarily on the back strap, this part right here, it would say RMS PO department. The post office, the reason why this gun survived is because the post office department transferred a lot of these guns to other federal agencies when they didn't need so many back in the mid 60s. So what they did is they had a grinding wheel. They grind off where it said RMS PO department or post office department, whatever was marked on here. They didn't bother with the number on the bottom. That's how you know that this is a Railway Mail Service pistol. You can go get a Colt factory letter, and I'm going to do that for this pistol. And of course, I'm not handling it very carefully. First of all, everything that I've got a collection of these. And they all have gun locks on them. You always treat a gun, you don't say that, oh, it's not loaded, okay? You assume it's loaded. You expect that it's loaded. So I'm handling it pretty haphazardly during this presentation. I want you to know that. But, to just illustrate that, again, it said RMS PO department on this backstrap. And the regular guns that were post office department, they took them all to Somerville, New Jersey, and had them in a large cage. I'd seen the cage. I never saw the contents of it. They had Thompson machine guns in there. They had all sorts of other firearms, shotguns, everything like that. Thousands of guns in that facility. Finally, they went ahead and took them to a foundry in Newark, New Jersey, and melted them all down. So that makes the Colt Banker Special a little unusual. Some people call it rare. I don't. When I can go to Gun Broker and see one of these available maybe 4 or 5 times a year, again, to me, that's not rare. It's uncommon, not rare. So anyway, that's probably more than you wanted to know about that. And then they fit into a leather holster that said Post Office Department. The early one said RMS on it for Railway Mail Service.
You see. Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody
the
else have any
difference
questions?
between
I'm sorry, go ahead.
what's the difference between railway post office service compared to postal service by mail trucks?
Well, the difference is the railway post office, you were sorting mail with clerks as you move from one point to another. A mail truck, which they call a highway contract route, or in earlier days, they called it a star route. The bagged mail was not open, it was not sorted, they were just transporting it from one place to another. So you had to rely upon either the origin office or the destination office doing that mail sorting. It wasn't done as the mode of transportation moved along. That is the big difference. And that's one of the, when you had an extensive network of passenger trains and therefore railway post offices, it worked very efficiently. You know, you've seen one example tonight where you had relatively few number of minutes between connections. Now, it may seem like 3 days to get from Maine down to New Jersey was a long time, but I've got lots of examples and I've written articles about it, and I can send those articles to anybody who's really interested, where the letter moved within 12 hours between origin and destination and was delivered the same day. In an era before telephones, back, you know, the
Telegraphs.
first decade of the 1900s, a lot of people would take postal cards and they'd say, can you come over for dinner tonight? And so, you know, you send that out in the morning, somebody would get it by noontime, and they would have enough time to go ahead and write a reply. Yeah, I'll be over at 4 p.m. for dinner, put it in the mail, and it would arrive before 4 p.m. for the people to know to put an extra plate on the table. So, you know, it's really almost no comparison, but I can explain sometime if you really want to know what star route represents, but that's what they call those routes of non-railway post office kind of conveyance.
By comparison,
By comparison,
a difference between road and rail mail deliveries.
okay, well, the big comparison is, first of all, in 1963, you had the introduction of the zip code. ZIP
Yes.
stands for Zone Improvement Plan. Back during World War II, you couldn't get enough distribution clerks because all the men were overseas fighting. They hired a bunch of other people that were 4F, or they were women, and they put them in the post office, said, here, you need to sort this mail. For Maine cities, they set up zones. If you look at, you know, anything prior to 1963, like a coupon for, you know, send in 25 cents for your Roy Rogers decoder ring, you know, to Chicago 25, Illinois, that 25 later on became 60025 for that part of Chicago. All they did was add first three digits. First three digits represented a sectional center of mail processing. And they, you know, this is a beginning of digitization and mechanization and automation. If you could put part of the address as something as numbers, then you can have a machine help sort it. And that is the big difference. They set up the sectional centers, and either using people or using optical character recognition, started sorting the mail. Now, there's a lot of reasons for the efficiency for that. Labor costs were very high. It was hard to get people who were really willing to stand 300 miles for 12 hours working in a dirty car with no air conditioning in the summer. As they say, they had air conditioning in the winter and heating in the summer. And, you know, it was tough life. It really was tough. And the ones who stayed with it, they were strong people. You know, we talk about today what the millennials are like, you know. I'm not sure very many of the baby boomers would really have wanted that kind of a job either. So be that as it may, um, automation, you've seen it everywhere. Automation is supplanted a lot of manual tasks. And so too with the post office department. The whole problem with the post office department right now, or postal service, is that nobody writes letters anymore. When was the last time you wrote a letter?
I guess that explains my text messages.
Yeah, text messages are where it's at. And text messages are okay. Now, one of the things that I do, by the way, is I substitute teach in the Alexandria City Public School systems. I'm also a professor of supply chain management for the University of Maryland Global College, global campus. But this is what I carry in the classroom. I don't carry a iPhone into the classroom. And the students, when they see this, oh man, what's that? It's a flip phone. Why do you want that? Why don't you want an iPhone? All I want to do is make phone calls. I don't want to text. I don't want to play games. I haven't got enough time in my remaining lifetime to play games. So that's my answer. So
I can imagine.
yeah, so I mean, we are all, and it's true for all the other people that are on this call, people who haven't said anything at all so far. We are all products of the era in which we grew up. The students, when I tell them, hey, I learned how to read with Dick and Jane, you know, look, Sally, look and see spot, run, run. There was no phonics. It was all sight words. You learned that when you saw the word RUN, it was run, not that's how they teach it now. I'm amazed what I see as a substitute teacher. I've learned as much as the students, maybe more than some of the students have, because I can reflect upon what it was like, 60 years earlier. So again, more than you probably wanted to know, but truck transportation, I mean, it's just a world of difference. Right now, trucks are the only way to go. They've relocated mail processing centers so that they're no longer next to railroad terminals. They're located at intersections of interstate highways. It only makes sense that you're going to move the stuff from one place to another in a truck. And if you want to sign up for my master's degree supply chain management course, we can have at it for about 11 weeks, and I'll teach you a lot more. I'm always looking for new students. I need the payroll. Okay. Anybody else have any questions?
Frank, you used to some years ago you used to sell some videos of railway mail. I think they were probably service films from years ago. Uh, do you out of curiosity? And I have some. I really have enjoyed them. Do you still sell those or?
Yeah, I still do. This is where, you get eclipsed by modern technology. I have a DVD that has Men and Mail in Transit, which was a training film, 56 minutes long, all filmed on the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. And then another one that's 18 minutes long called Mail in Motion, which, in addition to talking about railway post offices, talks a little bit about highway post offices and air transportation and air mail fields and all that. So, first of all, nobody watches DVDs anymore. DVDs have come and gone, just like VHS tapes. I am just amazed how rapidly, the technology has changed for video. And that creates just a little sidelight. That creates all sorts of problems for archival preservation, because I have presentations that I made 15 years ago in PowerPoint. I cannot open them anymore because Microsoft is not backward compatible. But in any event, that movie, those two movies, plus another one that was done in Britain in 1936 called Night Mail. Wonderful movies.
Those are great movies, and I've enjoyed them very much.
Well,
Very informative.
so what I was going to say is I still have the DVDs available. They're $21 postpaid, but you know, if you can go to YouTube and you do a search for Men in Mail in Transit or Mail in Motion or Night Mail, you see it all for free. So, you know, you can't compete with free. So, you know, I have them around, and any of those sales, the station in the background, it's $50 for a gallon of paint. That's where the money goes. The electric bill is almost $100 a month. You know, it's you got to have a source of income, and there's ain't no paying passengers at Boyce anymore. So anyway, a long answer to a very short question, but anybody's interested in the videos, the PDF file describes what those are, just in case anybody wants it. And good luck to anybody that likes DVDs, because I started going into laser disc when they had those. Those things were the size of a long play record, you know, and they lasted maybe 2 or 3 years. They cost about $100 each. Now you can't even find a player to put them on. So I don't know what to do about modern technology. It's moving way too fast for me. I'm glad everybody else on this call is much younger, because you're obviously adapting a lot easier.
Well,
So
Frank,
anyway,
one thing I have to say, I kept a Windows 3.1 and a Windows 95 around for years because of the compatibility issue. But just last year, time to clean up, and away they went.
well, yeah, you know, and the thing is, if you have that those earlier versions, how do you then take a file and convert it so that it's like Windows 97 or Windows XP, or you know, I don't like the fact that Microsoft and some other manufacturers, WordPerfect does a much better job. This is not intended to be a pitch for WordPerfect, but you can have a WordPerfect file that you did back in 1980 and still open it. Microsoft purposely wants you to do upgrades. And of course, every time there's a new version of Windows, then all your hardware, all your software suddenly doesn't work, you know, and you got to throw away a $2,000 scanner because it's not recognized unless you find an aftermarket somebody willing to give you the drivers for it. You know, there's a word that I used back in the old days called it's a racket. That's what it is. But anyway, now you're getting into editorial.
I'm wondering what's going to happen to Adobe files 25, 50
yeah.
years from now.
I'm concerned about that now, because
Yeah.
there's no guarantee that a JPEG file, a TIFF file, any of these files, word processing files of any kind, that just because you can open it today and you've invested a lot of time and effort, the only thing that's probably safe to say is you got to keep on converting things to text, DOS text. At least for the existence of a computer, something will probably still be able to open DOS text or a CVS, you know, file if it's Excel or something like that. I tell you what, that's your sermon. It's not Sunday, but that's your sermon for today. This technology, from an archival standpoint, I don't see very many people who are archivists that are really dealing with that issue. You know, and one of the reasons why I may digitize a lot of material in the Railway Mail Service library for convenience to access it. But I'm like you there, Dale. See all those books in the background? If I took down my green screen, you'd see an enormous collection of schemes of mail distribution. You got to hold on to the hard copy. Maybe a fire would come and wipe it out, but at least me or somebody 25 years from now could actually go in, assuming they can still read English, and go in and decipher it and get some information out of it, even if the hard copy file, I mean, if the digitized file doesn't work anymore.
I'm a believer.
Preaching to the choir. All right. Have I made this meeting too long or what? I see all the
Wonderful
people there at the
meeting.
firehouse. They're milling around in the back. And well, I hope you all have a good evening. And I'm glad that you all attended. I'm glad everybody else tuned in. And if you have any questions about the railway mail service, at least you know that there's a place that's got that information. That's the first part of an information search. Thank you, Gerald. I appreciate the thumbs up. You've been a strong supporter of the railway mail service library anyway, and I appreciate that.
Frank, I wanted to just say thank you for presenting to us tonight. I don't know, Dan, if you wanted to say any parting thoughts.
No, it's a lot of fun in the history to go back that far and learn how work used to be done to get communication across the country. So thank you, Frank, for the great presentation.
You're welcome. And unfortunately for me, is that, you know, I don't think of 1935 as being that long ago. Now, I was born in 1950. That's 15 years before me. Now, you know, if you're born after the year 2000, yeah, it starts getting to be ancient history. I know people don't even know when World War II occurred, you know, so it's changing times, but maybe all I'm doing is dating myself. There's a reason why I got white hair now, to match the white station behind me. So anyway, it's been a pleasure talking to you all. I talked to a couple people up at Amherst, and I was glad that I had that opportunity. And like I say, my contact information's there. I hope you will drop me a note when you get the PDF file if you have any other questions, or in the future you want to know something more about railway post offices.
Thank you. Thank you very
Yes.
much.
Good
Thank
night.
you very much, Frank.
Thank you, Frank. Excellent.